There we go.
Oh, okay.
Hi, friends. My name is Samantha Hendricks, and I'm the event coordinator here at Schuler Books. I am here today with Walter Lockwood, who is one of our Chapbook Press authors. And we're going to talk a little bit about his experience in writing his book, as well as his experience with working with the Chapbook Press. Walter's book, Drinking with Dead Friends and Other Stories, is available through our website or in our stores as we speak. Hi, Walter. How are you?
I'm good.
Great. So how about we start off with you telling us a little bit about Drinking with Dead Friends and how that book came to be.
Well, that's a hard question. And it is a book of 18 stories. And it came into being when at really the end of a screenwriting career, I became interested once again in where I started, and that was with the short story. It's how I learned to write a story in the first place. I taught it for many years at Grand Rapids Community College. I was a creative writing prof there, and the stories have all kinds of different inspiration. Many of them come from experience, I've found. That's kind of the starter dough for stories. My memories, but they don't necessarily have to be mine, and old journals and pieces of stories and scripts that went unsold or went unfinished, or things I steal from friends too. You know, their experiences. Not long ago, a friend of mine told me a very poignant story about his grandmother, who is pretty far gone in Alzheimer's now, doesn't recognize him. And she used to be a very good pianist. And he went to visit her, encouraged her to sit down at the piano. She didn't know who he was even. And insisted she couldn't play, but he put her fingers on the keys and she played a chord. And then she played another one. And then she played a song. And then she remembered his name. And then they began talking about things that they shared in common for a number of minutes, and then she disappeared in darkness again. But it kind of reminded me of what's going on with Tony Bennett right now. Music is a powerful thing, and it's a powerful connector to the past and to experience. And I asked my friend if he would mind if I used it in a story, and he was fine with that. But anyway, the sources are mainly from experience, but also from reading. As I said, I taught it for years, but in this period where I've been focusing pretty intently on the short story, I've done tons of reading of the story, more than I think I ever have before, hundreds of stories. I recently bought D.H. Lawrence's complete stories. I think there are 78 of them. And there are some masterful stories in this. And the mysterious dynamics of male-female relationships revealed with an intensity I don't see very often. And well, there are tons of others, Flannery O'Connor and Alice Walker and John Updike and Steinbeck and Fitzgerald and Hemingway, and more recent ones like Amy Hempel and Tessa Hadley, who has become my favorite. But I said I taught the short story for years, and I taught a structured story. I taught with an asterisk always. The short story is a curious form. It can be many, many things. You can't put it in a box. But I felt that a beginning writer ought to know at least how to structure a story. So I would teach plot structure. I would teach point of view, I would teach characterization, I would teach weaving of the elements of narrative together to make a story. And the story would move from a problem to a resolution, or at least an implied resolution. I mentioned Alice Walker a minute ago. She said that many stories take a journey and arrive someplace. I think that's the kind of story I tend to write. She described her stories, and I love her stories, but they're completely different than mine, as being a big house with a lot of rooms. And she wanders from room to room and back and around. And she meanders through the story and the people who live there. And she develops more slowly than I do, but she gets somewhere. I tend to create a problem, move it toward at least an implied kind of resolution, develop character fully, and by the end, it usually involves some kind of measurable change in the character. So my stories tend to be of that sort. Is that enough of an answer to that question?
It's absolutely wonderful. I love the
Okay.
answer to that question. So when you're writing your short stories, is there any, you talk about where you pull your inspiration from, but was there any research that you had to do while doing your writing at all?
Well, with short stories, it's with a novel, there's always a lot of research. I wrote novels once I learned kind of to write the short story, and I kind of learned to write the novel too, although I never felt I could get my hands around it. The form I think I liked the best was the screenplay form, which is dialogue driven and about 120 pages long. It was a size that I could work with, but the longer forms usually take a fair amount of research. And with a short story, it may be something as incidental as understanding the occupation of your main character. It might not be more than that. With my title story, Drinking with Dead Friends, it's a story that begins with an old man going to a bar, and he's just come from a funeral. And he has a beer, and then he orders another one, and he realizes that it's, the name of the bar is the Last Chance Saloon. We have one right here in Grand Rapids, and it's hymns and beer night. And the Last Chance also has one of those. And it's kind of an odd combination, but it works in an interesting way. And so he's there on that night, and all of a sudden, one of his best friends comes in the door, sits down at his table, and picks up a hymnal and begins to sing. And the man realizes that his best friend has been dead for 20 years. Another friend comes in, his other best friend. He's been dead 10 years. And by degrees, he finds out that the main character finds out that it was his funeral that he's been to. And they are here to shepherd him into the beginning stages of the afterlife. Mm-hmm. So that one required research. I went back into some of the oddities I've read among theologians, and particularly Emanuel Swedenborg, who was an 18th century Swedish scientist and theologian and kind of a mystic visionary. And he wrote a book called Heaven and Hell, which I looked back at, and very interesting views of the afterlife and also of heaven and hell. He believed they both existed, but nobody went to hell, he felt, unless they chose to. C.S. Lewis had a similar kind of idea that he developed. I looked into Orthodox Christianity on the subject. I even ran, you mentioned a rabbit hole in some of the questions you sent me. This was a rabbit hole of down into Wicca, which harks back to pre-Christian paganism. And the Wiccans believe that right after death, you go to a place called Summerland. And very intriguing. You go there to rest up and recuperate from life, and also to confront your lies and your errors and your cruelties and your omissions. And the Wiccan, like Swedenborg, believes that life after death is going to be working on things too. I mean, you don't step into perfection. You got to keep working, you know. You got to learn to stand the light. So anyway, this was kind of research I had to do in that one, and it led me in all kinds of interesting directions. So, by the way, I used to spend hours and days in the library and in my books scouring for answers to questions. As negative as the internet can be, it is also a wonderful source of accurate material for writers. I mean, it's right at your fingertips, and it makes life much easier.
It does. Wonderful. Well, at what point did you decide these are the stories I'm going to put in this book, and you sought out the Chapbook Press?
That's two different questions.
It's fair.
I decided on the stories I was going to put in the book because I wrote one right after another, and as soon as they accumulated to big enough to make a book, that's what I did. Why Chapbook Press? That is an easy one. I published a novel in the 70s. I had a book agent in New York, and it was published with Prentice Hall. And the book business was fairly clear cut at that point. You get an agent, the agent does most of the work, you go out and do book signings wherever you can. And the agent does a lot of the work. My next step, encouraged by a friend, I wrote a screenplay. I got an agent, I sold it. It was made into a film, and so I found myself in that business. And again, this was a business in which agents really kind of did the legwork for you. So I was in that for 20 years or more, and I retired from it, and all of a sudden, I have a book. I had a Chapbook Press book before this one. It was a book for young people called The Green Room. And shortly after I retired from teaching, my wife and I began homeschooling our two girls. And one of the projects we did during this period was we talked about writing a Narnia kind of book, a fantasy. And so they would suggest things, I'd write them down. We'd do a chapter at a time. I'd read it to them. These were quite young girls too, and they would make suggestions, and they would draw pictures of the characters. And eventually all those things came together in a book, which I tried to sell, but I discovered that the book world was so vastly different than what it had been when I started in it years and years before, that I felt like Rip Van Winkle. I'd wakened up into a completely different world. I was in the very early learning stages of what the internet has done to publishing. And I had a friend who served as an agent locally. I went out there for about 3 years. I said to myself, I don't have time to wait for this. When I was young, I did maybe. I didn't like to, but now I don't want to wait. And so I met Pierre Camille, who is, what would you call him? He's the head of Chapbook Press anyway. he's the man to go to. And a friend recommended him. And Pierre is wonderful at this work of self-publishing. What I was looking for was a simple, satisfying process, a handsome, highly professional looking book. And to get the book to the people I hoped might read it, and get it offered for sale through Schuler's and then online through Schuler's and Amazon. And not to have to travel around the country doing book signings, but do whatever local advertising you could and settle for modest returns. In fact, yeah, you sell a modest number of copies and so be it. You really, through the internet, I made connections with people and sold some books and got some good reviews. Now, I'm not talking about the green room now. I'm talking about Drinking with Dead Friends. But the green room, I published and learned from it. And didn't think twice about publishing Drinking with Dead Friends through Chapbook Press. And I suspect my next one will be the same. But I'm no longer looking to make a name or a fortune. And I write stories because I love to do it, because I'm compelled to do it. And I like them to appear in a form that is readable, you know? And I think Chapbook Press just does a very fine job of that. So I'm happy with it.
Wonderful. I love those answers. Pierre's one of our favorites around here, so that's lovely to hear. What's next for you? What are your plans? Do you have more books on the horizon, do you think?
Sure. I just keep writing. I'm compelled to it. Trouble with it is that I enjoy so much that time goes like nothing. I mean, a blink of an eye and the day has gone by. I have no problem working 4 to 8 hours doing it. Of course, I'm retired and I can do that now. I used to have to steal time. Alice Munro said that she wrote short stories because she always had babies to take care of and diapers to wash. And she couldn't write a longer story because she didn't have time to do it. She had to do it at night, you know, after everybody was asleep. But I have more freedom now. But anyway, I've begun a new series of stories. I just keep writing stories. This one I had originally planned to be a baseball theme. Baseball has been important to me. It's been important to my family and very much a part of our life. And I wrote 4 of them, and I had another one that was published some time ago. So that made 5, and one of them is fairly long. But I kind of ran out of steam with that. So this is going to be a book of short stories that happen to have some baseball stories. And the other stories are whatever happens, you know. Experience. I stumble on a passage from an old journal, a poem I've written, and all of a sudden it stuns me into a thought, an idea, and I kind of dream it into being from there. So it will be a book of short stories. I'm not sure when it's going to be done, but I've got 10 or 11 done at this point. So that's getting halfway there anyway, a little more.
Wonderful. Well, friends, if you are interested in purchasing Walter's book, Drinking with Dead Friends and Other Stories, you can purchase it, like I mentioned, through our website, schulerbooks.com, or I believe it's also available other places on the interwebs, but of course through Schuler Books. So you can stop in our store, check out the website. Walter, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you, Samantha. It's been my pleasure.
All right. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.